There's a moment when you realize the person who cares least in any interaction holds all the cards. It's not about being cruel or heartless. It's about understanding a fundamental law of human psychology that most people refuse to accept. Desperation repels, indifference attracts. The average person pours their energy into proving how much they care, how invested they are, how badly they want the outcome. And in that moment of emotional overflow, they hand their power to whoever is watching with calm, detached eyes. This is the brutal mathematics of human dynamics. The one who needs less, gets more. The one who wants less, is wanted more. The one who cares less, is cared about more. It's not fair. It's not moral. But it's absolutely true. Let's get one thing straight. Most people confuse caring with weakness and think indifference means cruelty. But strategic indifference isn't about being cold. It's about being selectively invested. It's about understanding that your emotional energy is currency, and like any currency, the more you spend carelessly, the less valuable it becomes. When you care too much about an outcome, you telegraph your position. You show your hand. You reveal your desperation. And desperation, no matter how noble the cause, shifts the power dynamic immediately. Because the person who can walk away always has leverage over the person who can't. Think about the most powerful people you've encountered in business, romance, or social settings. Not the loudest or most dramatic, but the ones who seemed untouchable. What did they all have in common? They appeared to need nothing from you. They engaged when they chose to. They withdrew when it suited them. They gave their attention like a gift, not a guarantee. That's the art of strategic indifference. You don't stop caring about everything. You become surgical about what deserves your emotional investment. And more importantly, you never let others see the full extent of that investment. The fatal flaw of emotional transparency. Most people think honesty about their feelings builds trust and connection. I really want this job. I'm so excited about this opportunity. You mean everything to me. They believe vulnerability creates bonds. And sometimes it does. But it also creates imbalance. The moment you reveal how much something means to you, you've given the other party pricing power. They know your desperation level. They know your breaking point. They know exactly how far they can push because you've already shown them your emotional ceiling. In negotiations, this is suicide. In relationships, it's suffocation. In social dynamics, it's submissive behavior disguised as authenticity. Because the person receiving your emotional overflow doesn't feel honored, they feel burdened. And burden creates resentment, not attraction. Strategic indifference flips this dynamic. When you care less visibly, people start wondering, why isn't he desperate like everyone else? What does he know that I don't? What makes him so calm about this? That wondering becomes respect. That respect becomes influence. The scarcity principle of emotional investment. Here's what the emotionally reactive don't understand. Your care, your attention, your emotional investment. These things only have value when they're scarce. When you pour your heart out to everyone, when you chase every opportunity with visible desperation, when you make your needs obvious to anyone watching, you've created emotional inflation. But when you become selective, when people have to earn your investment, when your enthusiasm becomes something rare and precious, suddenly everyone wants it. Because humans are wired to value what's difficult to obtain and dismiss what's freely given. Think about it in romantic terms. The person who texts back immediately, who's always available, who constantly expresses their feelings, they become predictable, safe, boring. But the person who takes time to respond, who has other priorities, who gives their attention in measured doses, they become magnetic. This isn't manipulation. This is value creation. You're not withholding to be cruel. You're maintaining scarcity to preserve worth. The power of unattachment in professional settings. Walk into any high-stakes business meeting and watch the dynamics. The people who need the deal most speak first, speak loudest, and reveal their position fastest. They lean forward. They oversell. They justify. They convince. And in doing so, they immediately place themselves in the position of supplicant. But watch the person who sits back, who listens more than they speak, who asks questions instead of making statements, who seems genuinely curious about the outcome but not desperate for it. That person controls the room without saying much at all. Why? Because their indifference creates psychological pressure. Everyone else is working to impress them. Everyone else is trying to read their position. Everyone else is wondering what it would take to get them fully engaged. When someone throws out a lowball offer, most people react immediately. They argue. They justify their worth. They explain why they deserve more. But the strategically indifferent, they simply pause. They look slightly puzzled. Maybe they say, "Interesting," and then they let the silence hang. That silence forces the other party to fill the void, often by improving their offer without being asked. Because your lack of reaction suggests either, 1, you have better options they don't know about, or 2, you're so confident in your value that their offer doesn't even register as serious. Both interpretations shift power in your direction. This is where strategic indifference gets controversial, but it's also where it's most potent. In romantic relationships, the person who cares less, or appears to care less, almost always has more influence over the dynamic. It's not that they love less. It's that they need less. They're complete without the relationship. They're happy alone. They have other priorities, other sources of fulfillment, other people who value them. This self-sufficiency doesn't repel love. It magnetizes it. Because the person who doesn't need you to complete them is the only person capable of choosing you freely. And free choice feels more valuable than obligated attachment. When your partner says something cutting, most people immediately react. They defend. They explain. They get emotional. But the strategically indifferent partner? They might pause, look slightly amused, and say, "If that's how you see it." Then they continue with their day as if nothing happened. This doesn't escalate the conflict, it deflates it. Because emotional reactions feed drama. Indifference starves it. The attacking partner is left swinging at air, and that makes them question whether their attack was even worth launching. This are the social hierarchy of emotional investment. In any social group, there's an invisible hierarchy based on who cares most about the group's approval. The people at the bottom are those who desperately want to belong, who laugh too hard at jokes, who agree too quickly with popular opinions, who make themselves constantly available. At the top are those who seem to take the group or leave it. They show up when they want to. They contribute when they feel like it. They don't chase approval or fear rejection because they appear to have abundant options. This isn't antisocial behavior. It's selective social investment. They care about the people worth caring about, but they don't scatter their attention like seeds in bad soil. When someone in the group tries to create drama or demand attention, most people either feed into it or run from it. But the strategically indifferent person, they acknowledge it neutrally and move on. That sounds frustrating for you. Then they change the subject or redirect their attention elsewhere. This response does two things. 1, it doesn't reward the attention-seeking behavior, and 2, it positions them as above the petty dynamics that trap everyone else. Listen to this: sometimes the most powerful move isn't what you do, it's what you stop doing. When you withdraw your investment, your attention, your emotional energy from a situation, you create a vacuum that others feel compelled to fill. If someone is taking your presence for granted, stop being so present. If someone is dismissing your contributions, stop contributing so readily. If someone is treating your time as worthless, make your time scarce. This isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about recalibrating value. People often don't appreciate what they have until they realize they might lose it. Your strategic withdrawal reminds them that your investment is a choice, not a guarantee. The key is to withdraw calmly, without drama, without explanation. You don't announce your indifference, you demonstrate it through your actions. Or rather, through your lack of action. This day's social media has turned emotional investment into performance art. People broadcast their feelings, their desires, their opinions, their reactions to everything. They like, comment, share, respond to every piece of content that crosses their screen. And in doing so, they make their attention worthless because it's given to everything. But watch the people who post rarely, who respond selectively, who seem to have lives too interesting to document constantly. They command attention precisely because they don't seem to need it. When they do engage, it feels significant. When they share something, people pay attention. When they comment, it carries weight. Because their digital indifference has created scarcity value. If someone attacks you online, most people either ignore it completely or respond defensively. But strategic indifference offers a third option: acknowledge it briefly and dismissively, then move on as if it barely registered. Noted. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. Interesting perspective. These responses don't give the attacker the emotional reaction they're seeking, but they also don't look like you're running away. You've acknowledged their existence just enough to show you're not bothered, then continued with your life as if they're not worth more of your mental real estate. Here's where strategic indifference becomes almost magical. When you stop chasing something, it often starts chasing you. When you stop needing approval, people want to give it to you. When you stop fighting for attention, you become more interesting. This happens because most people are conditioned to value what's difficult to obtain. Your indifference signals that you have abundance, abundant options, abundant self-worth, abundant sources of fulfillment. And abundance is attractive in a world full of scarcity mindset. Someone offers you an opportunity and you respond with genuine curiosity but no desperation. Tell me more about that. It sounds interesting. Not, yes. I'd love to. When can we start? The first response suggests you're evaluating whether they're worthy of your time. The second suggests you're grateful they're willing to give you a chance. Can you feel the power differential in those two positions? Strategic indifference isn't about becoming a sociopath. It's about becoming selective. You still care deeply about the things and people that matter. But you stop broadcasting that care to everyone who might exploit it. You care about your family, but you don't let toxic family members manipulate you with guilt. You care about your work, but you don't let employers take advantage of your dedication. You care about your friends, but you don't let them treat your time as infinitely available. You care about your romantic partner, but you don't lose yourself in the relationship. This selective caring creates boundaries that protect your emotional energy and, paradoxically, make you more attractive to others. Because people respect what they have to earn more than what's freely given. Building strategic indifference is like building any other skill. It requires practice and patience. You'll be tempted to revert to old patterns of emotional reactivity, especially when things matter to you. But every time you choose calm detachment over emotional investment, you're building a reputation for being unshakable. People start to notice that you don't get ruffled easily, that you don't chase opportunities desperately, that you don't need their approval to feel good about yourself. And this reputation becomes a form of social currency. When you do show genuine enthusiasm or investment, it carries more weight because it's rare. When you do get excited about something, people pay attention because they know you're selective with your excitement. The final level of strategic indifference is when it becomes effortless. When you no longer have to consciously choose not to care. When your sense of self-worth is so internally generated that external validation becomes genuinely optional. Taking advantage of the leverage of silence. When not speaking becomes your greatest weapon. There's a precise moment in every power exchange when the person who speaks first loses control of the entire interaction. It's not about who speaks loudest, longest, or most eloquently. It's about who can endure the discomfort of silence while others scramble to fill the void with their own desperation. Most people fear silence like death itself. They treat quiet moments as emergencies that must be immediately rescued with words, explanations, nervous laughter, or meaningless chatter. But silence isn't empty space waiting to be filled. Silence is pressure. It's psychological weight that builds with each passing second, and whoever breaks first reveals exactly how much power they're willing to surrender to escape the discomfort. This is where the art of never defending yourself merges with strategic indifference to create something far more potent: weaponized silence. You don't just refuse to defend or appear not to care. You use the absence of your voice to force others into positions of weakness they create for themselves. Every conversation has an invisible economy of need. Someone needs information. Someone needs validation. Someone needs a reaction. Someone needs to fill the quiet. And whoever needs more, loses more. When you master the leverage of silence, you become the person who needs least from any exchange. Not because you don't care about outcomes, but because you're comfortable with uncertainty in ways that terrify the average person. Think about the last time you sat in complete silence with someone for 30 seconds. Can you even remember such a moment? Most people can't, because someone always breaks within 5 to 10 seconds. They make a comment about the weather, ask a meaningless question, or just start talking to hear their own voice. But those 30 seconds reveal everything about power dynamics. The person who breaks the silence first has just demonstrated that their discomfort matters more than their strategic position. They've admitted that silence feels dangerous to them. And once you know what someone fears, you know how to control them. Strategic indifference says, "I don't need this outcome." Silence amplifies that message to, "I don't even need to participate in this conversation." When you combine both, you create something that most people find psychologically unbearable. Because humans are social creatures wired to seek engagement, your refusal to engage triggers primal anxieties. They start wondering, did I offend him? Does he think I'm not worth responding to? Is he bored with me? Does he know something I don't? This internal questioning is where your power multiplies. You haven't said anything, but your silence has created an entire narrative in their mind. And that narrative almost always works in your favor. When someone makes a subtle insult and you respond with complete silence, you're not just refusing to defend yourself. You're making their attack echo in the empty space until it sounds petty even to them. You're letting them hear their own words without the validation of your reaction. And most people, when forced to listen to their own aggression in a silent room, feel foolish. This is how silence reveals truth. Here's what happens when you refuse to fill conversational voids. Other people start oversharing. They reveal their true motivations, their insecurities, their desperation, their manipulation tactics, all because they can't tolerate the pressure of your quiet attention. In business negotiations, this is devastatingly effective. When someone makes an offer and you simply stare at them without responding, they often start adding incentives you never asked for. And of course, we could also include, we might be flexible on the timeline. I'm sure we could work something out on the price. Your silence made them assume their initial offer was inadequate. They negotiated against themselves to escape the discomfort of your unresponsive gaze. In personal relationships, the same principle applies with even more intensity. When your partner makes an accusation and you respond with calm, sustained eye contact but no words, they often begin backtracking. I don't know for sure. Maybe I'm wrong about this. I'm probably just being emotional. Your silence didn't dismiss their concern. It made them question their own certainty. And uncertainty is the enemy of confident attacks. Knowing when to remain silent is only half the skill. The other half is knowing exactly when to break your silence for maximum impact. Because when you do finally speak after a sustained period of quiet, your words carry exponentially more weight. The optimal moment to speak is when the other person has exhausted themselves trying to provoke a response. They've escalated, repeated themselves, grown emotional, maybe even started attacking your silence itself. Are you going to say anything? Why aren't you responding? This is ridiculous. That's your moment. When they're at peak frustration with your quiet, you respond with something brief, calm, and precisely targeted. Are you finished? Or, is that how you want to be remembered? Or simply, interesting? The contrast between their emotional crescendo and your composed brevity is devastating. Everyone watching suddenly sees the interaction clearly. One person losing control, one person maintaining it effortlessly. Most people rush to fill even micro-silences in conversation. Someone asks a question, they immediately launch into an answer. Someone makes a statement, they instantly agree or disagree. This reaction speed telegraphs anxiety about appearing slow, stupid, or unprepared. But when you insert deliberate pauses before responding, you accomplish several things simultaneously. You appear thoughtful rather than reactive. People assume you're carefully considering your words, which makes those words seem more valuable when they come. You create anticipation. The longer you pause, the more attention focuses on what you'll say next. Your eventual response carries more weight because people have invested time waiting for it. You make others uncomfortable with the silence, revealing how much they need your validation or response. Their fidgeting, repeated questions, or attempts to prompt you expose their desperation. The ideal pause length is 3 to 5 seconds for normal conversation, longer in high-stakes situations. Long enough to create noticeable tension, not so long that you appear confused or rude. In group conversations, most people compete for airtime. They interrupt, talk over each other, raise their voices to be heard. They treat silence as an opportunity to jump in with their own thoughts. This creates chaos where the loudest voice wins, not necessarily the most intelligent or influential. But when you remain consistently quiet in groups, something fascinating happens. People start deferring to you. They begin looking for your reactions, asking for your opinions, pausing to see if you want to contribute. Your silence makes your eventual contributions feel more significant than everyone else's constant chatter. What do you think, Marcus? Becomes a common refrain because your scarcity of speech has created demand for your perspective. You've trained the group to value your input by making it rare. When you do speak in these settings, use the definitive statement technique. Here's what's actually happening. Or, the real issue is. Or, this is how we solve it. Not opinions or suggestions, but declarations that sound final. Combined with your history of thoughtful silence, these statements carry authority that drowns out the background noise of other voices. Online interactions amplify the power of silence exponentially because digital communication removes all the physical cues that might soften your non-response. When someone sends you an inflammatory message and you simply don't reply, they're left staring at their own words on a screen with no indication of your emotional state. This drives people absolutely crazy. They'll send follow-up messages. Did you see my last message? Are you going to respond? I know you're online. Each additional message makes them look more desperate while you remain mysteriously absent. The key is selective non-response. Don't ignore everything that just looks like you're not engaged. Instead, respond to some messages normally while completely ignoring others. This pattern suggests that you're actively choosing not to engage with certain content, which implies judgment about what's worth your attention. When you do break your digital silence, make it count. Respond with something brief and final that closes the conversation rather than continuing it. Noted, or thanks for letting me know, or that's your choice. These responses acknowledge the person without giving them the emotional engagement they're seeking. This are the psychology of uncomfortable silence. Most people break silence because they interpret it as rejection or hostility. They assume that if someone isn't talking, they must be angry, bored, or dismissive. This interpretation creates anxiety that compels them to fill the quiet with words, questions, or attempts at connection. But this assumption reveals their own insecurity. Confident people are comfortable with silence because they don't need constant validation through verbal exchange. They can sit quietly without assuming the other person's silence means something negative about them. When you become comfortable with extended silences, you force others to confront their own discomfort with being unvalidated. They start projecting their anxiety onto your quiet. He must think I'm stupid, or she's probably judging me, or this is awkward. That projection is where your power lies. You haven't done anything aggressive or hostile. You've simply failed to provide the constant reassurance that insecure people crave. And that failure makes them work harder to earn your approval. These are also the silence that ends arguments. Traditional advice says you should address conflicts directly, communicate openly, work through disagreements together. But this approach assumes both parties are operating in good faith and genuinely want resolution. What happens when someone is picking a fight for emotional reasons? When they want drama, attention, or just someone to blame for their bad mood? Engaging with their complaints validates their emotional state and gives them the reaction they're unconsciously seeking. Strategic silence starves these dynamics. When someone launches into an emotional attack and you respond with calm, sustained quiet, you refuse to participate in their drama. You don't feed their emotional fire with defensive responses or counterattacks. The silence forces them to hear their own words echoing without reinforcement. Most people, when deprived of the reactive audience they expected, begin to feel foolish about their outburst. The argument dies not because you won it, but because you refuse to participate in it. Silence creates the impression that you know more than you're saying. When others are sharing information, opinions, or gossip, and you remain quiet, people assume you have additional context that makes their chatter seem naive or incomplete. This assumption builds your reputation as someone with deeper knowledge, better connections, or superior judgment. People start coming to you not just for what you say, but for what you might know but aren't saying. In professional settings, this is incredibly valuable. While others are eager to share everything they know to appear valuable, your selective silence makes people assume your knowledge is more strategic, more confidential, more significant than what's being openly discussed. "I wonder what she thinks about this," becomes a common thought about you, and wondering is the beginning of respect. Here's how to identify who has real power in any room. Watch who's comfortable with silence and who immediately tries to fill it. The person who can sit quietly while others scramble to restart conversation is almost always the person with the most actual authority. This works because silence tolerance correlates with power. People in strong positions don't need constant verbal validation. They don't fear being misunderstood because they're secure in their status. They don't rush to fill quiet moments because they're comfortable with their own presence. People in weak positions do the opposite. They talk to prove their value, fill silence to avoid judgment, and constantly seek verbal confirmation that they're accepted, understood, or appreciated. Building your silence tolerance requires practice because most people have been conditioned to fear quiet moments. Start with micro-silences. Instead of immediately responding to questions, pause for 2 seconds. Instead of filling every gap in conversation, let some gaps exist. Gradually increase the duration as you become more comfortable. Work up to 5-second pauses, then 10, then complete non-responses in certain situations. Pay attention to how others react as your silence tolerance grows. You'll notice them becoming more deferential, more curious about your thoughts, more respectful of your eventual contributions. The goal isn't to become mute, but to make your words scarce enough to be valuable. When you speak less, people listen more carefully. When you pause before responding, people assume you're being thoughtful rather than slow. The highest level of silence mastery is when your quiet presence becomes magnetic rather than awkward. People want to be around you not because you entertain them with constant chatter, but because your calm silence makes them feel more centered, more thoughtful, more significant. This happens when your silence stops being defensive or strategic and becomes genuinely self-contained. You're not quiet because you're calculating the best response. You're quiet because you're complete within yourself and don't need external validation through constant verbal exchange. At this level, your rare words become events. When you do speak, conversations pause. People listen. Your opinions carry weight not because you've argued for them, but because you've demonstrated through your silence that you only speak when you have something genuinely worth saying. The person who has mastered the leverage of silence never needs to demand attention, respect, or consideration. These things flow naturally to someone who has made their voice valuable through its strategic scarcity. Because in a world full of noise, the person who knows when to be quiet becomes the most powerful voice in the room. At this point, you're not performing indifference for strategic advantage. You simply are indifferent to outcomes you can't control, while remaining fully engaged with processes you can influence. This isn't emotional numbness. It's emotional sovereignty. You feel what you choose to feel, when you choose to feel it, about things worthy of your emotional investment. And that sovereignty, that self-contained completeness, is what makes you magnetic to others who are still trapped in cycles of emotional reactivity and external validation seeking. The person who needs nothing from you is the person everyone wants something from. The person whose care must be earned is the person whose care feels most valuable. The person who can walk away is the person others will work hardest to keep. That's the art of strategic indifference. Not caring less about everything, but caring selectively about what deserves your investment. And never letting anyone see the full extent of how much something means to you until they've proven they won't use that knowledge against you. 'Cause in a world full of people desperately seeking attention, approval, and validation, the person who seems to need none of these things becomes the most powerful person in the room. Here's where strategic indifference becomes almost magical. When you stop chasing something, it often starts chasing you. When you stop needing approval, people want to give it to you. When you stop fighting for attention, you become more interesting. This happens because most people are conditioned to value what's difficult to obtain. Your indifference signals that you have abundance, abundant options, abundant self-worth, abundant sources of fulfillment. And abundance is attractive in a world full of scarcity mindset. But here's what most people miss. The reverse psychology effect isn't just about playing hard to get. It's about fundamentally rewiring the psychological dynamics of every interaction you enter. When you truly embody abundance rather than perform it, you create a gravitational pull that others find irresistible. Human beings are wired with what psychologists call loss aversion. We fear losing something more than we desire gaining it. When your attention, approval, or presence becomes less available, the other person's brain automatically categorizes it as a potential loss. And losses, even imaginary ones, create urgency. Think about the last time you saw a limited time offer, or only 3 left in stock. Even if you weren't initially interested, the scarcity made you reconsider. The reverse psychology effect works on the same principle, but with human connection instead of products. When someone realizes they can't easily predict your responses, can't count on your availability, can't take your interest for granted, their brain starts working overtime trying to secure what might slip away. This isn't manipulation, it's simply how human psychology operates. The 3 phases of reverse psychology mastery. Phase 1. The strategic withdrawal. This is where most people start, and it's also where most people fail. They withdraw attention or investment too obviously, too dramatically, or with too much emotional charge. Real strategic withdrawal is surgically precise. You don't announce your withdrawal. You don't explain it. You don't make it punitive. You simply redirect your energy elsewhere with the same calm indifference you'd show when switching TV channels. Someone who used to get your immediate text responses now waits 3 hours. Someone who used to have your undivided attention during conversations now notices you checking your phone occasionally. Someone who used to be your first priority now finds themselves scheduled around other commitments. The key is gradual calibration. Too sudden, and it feels like punishment. Too slow, and it goes unnoticed. The sweet spot is noticeable but not dramatic, like slowly turning down the volume on a song until the other person realizes they're straining to hear it. Phase 2. The curiosity gap. This is where the magic begins. When you maintain your new level of investment consistently, not as a temporary tactic, but as your new baseline, the other person enters what I call the curiosity gap. They start wondering, why is he different lately? What changed? Does he have other options I don't know about? Am I losing his interest? What would it take to get back to where we were? This internal dialogue is working in your favor 24/7, even when you're not present. Their brain is now actively problem-solving how to recapture something they didn't even realize they valued until it became less available. Watch for the testing behaviors that emerge during this phase. They start initiating contact more frequently. They become more responsive to your communications. They offer things they've never offered before. They ask subtle questions about your schedule, your priorities, your other relationships. They begin competing for your attention with increased effort. Phase 3. The new dynamic equilibrium. The final phase is when the power dynamic has permanently shifted. They now operate from the assumption that your investment must be earned rather than expected. Your attention has become valuable currency rather than a given resource. At this level, you're no longer consciously applying reverse psychology. You've trained others to treat your time, attention, and emotional investment as the scarce resources they actually are. Common mistakes that kill the effect. I'm not going to chase you anymore. I'm done putting in all the effort. From now on, I'm focusing on myself. The moment you announce your strategy, you've destroyed it. Real abundance doesn't need to be declared, it simply is. When you announce your withdrawal, you're still seeking a reaction, which signals that you haven't truly detached. Using withdrawal as retaliation for specific behaviors makes your indifference conditional and predictable. Since you didn't return my call, I'm not returning yours. This isn't strategic indifference, it's tit-for-tat emotional manipulation. True reverse psychology withdrawal isn't about punishing bad behavior. It's about investing your energy in better opportunities. Going from completely available to completely unavailable overnight creates confusion rather than curiosity. The other person doesn't think, I wonder what he's up to. They think, something's wrong, or, he's playing games. Effective reverse psychology is about recalibration, not elimination. You're becoming more selective, not completely absent. Expecting immediate results and getting frustrated when the other person doesn't immediately start chasing you. Real reverse psychology works on a timeline of weeks or months, not days. Impatience makes you reactive to their responses, or lack thereof, which destroys the very indifference you're trying to cultivate. Advanced reverse psychology techniques. The intermittent reinforcement schedule. Occasionally show the level of interest or investment you used to show consistently. This creates what psychologists call an intermittent reinforcement schedule, the most addictive pattern known to behavioral science. If you used to text back immediately 100% of the time, now you do it 20% of the time, but randomly. They never know which message will get the immediate response, so they keep trying. The gracious indifference response. When they increase their efforts to regain your previous level of investment, don't reward it immediately. Instead, acknowledge it graciously but briefly, that's thoughtful of you, or, I appreciate that. Then continue with your life as if their increased effort is nice but not necessary. This maintains the dynamic while avoiding the trap of seeming ungrateful or manipulative. When they directly ask about your changed behavior, you seem different lately, or, are we okay? Don't explain or justify. Simply redirect, I'm just focused on some new priorities, or, I've been exploring some interesting opportunities. This gives them information without explanation, maintains mystery without being evasive. They start putting in effort they've never put in before. The friend who never initiated plans starts suggesting activities. The romantic interest who used to give one-word responses starts asking thoughtful questions. They become subtly competitive with others for your attention. They might mention when they notice you engaging with other people, or start offering exclusive opportunities they've never mentioned before. They begin explicitly acknowledging your worth in ways they never did when your attention was guaranteed. I really value our conversations, or, you always have such interesting perspectives. When reverse psychology doesn't work, some people genuinely don't care about maintaining connection with you. In these cases, your withdrawal simply confirms their existing indifference. The reverse psychology effect only works on people who had some level of investment to begin with. People with truly secure attachment styles might simply respect your boundaries and find other sources of fulfillment. They won't chase because they don't need to. They're complete without external validation. If someone has significantly more power than you in a particular context, your boss, someone you're financially dependent on, reverse psychology can backfire. They might simply replace you rather than chase you. The long-term mastery. The ultimate goal isn't to make people chase you. It's to create relationships where your investment is valued because it's genuinely scarce and meaningful. When you master reverse psychology, you stop needing to apply it consciously. Your natural selectivity with your time, attention, and emotional energy creates the effect automatically. You become the person who others work to impress, rather than the person working to impress others. Your approval becomes something to be earned, rather than something freely given. Your presence becomes something to be appreciated, rather than something to be expected. This isn't about manipulation or games. It's about understanding that human psychology values what's difficult to obtain and dismisses what's freely available. When you align your behavior with this psychological reality, you create authentic power rather than desperate pursuit. The person who has mastered the reverse psychology effect never needs to chase opportunities, relationships, or recognition. These things are naturally drawn to someone who has made their investment valuable through its strategic scarcity. Because in a world full of people desperately offering themselves to anyone who might want them, the person who must be won rather than simply accepted becomes the most magnetic presence in any room. Here's the uncomfortable truth that most people miss about strategic indifference. It's not about becoming emotionally numb. It's about becoming emotionally sovereign. The highest practitioners of these principles aren't cold calculators. They're deeply empathetic humans who have learned to channel their emotional energy with surgical precision. This is where most people get it catastrophically wrong. They confuse emotional regulation with emotional suppression. They think strategic indifference means turning off their capacity to care. But that's not mastery, that's emotional cowardice dressed up as strategy. The difference between regulation and suppression. Emotional suppression is pushing feelings down, pretending they don't exist, numbing yourself to avoid discomfort. It's the person who stops feeling anything to avoid feeling hurt. This creates sociopaths, not strategically powerful individuals. Emotional regulation is feeling everything fully while choosing consciously how to express and act on those feelings. It's not, I don't care. It's, I care deeply, and because I care, I'm going to respond in the way that creates the best long-term outcome. The strategically indifferent person feels the sting of rejection, the frustration of being undervalued, the desire for someone's approval. But they don't let these feelings dictate their behavior. They process the emotion privately, then respond from a place of conscious choice rather than reactive impulse. How to care deeply while appearing to care less. This is the ultimate paradox. The more you genuinely care about someone's highest good, the less you'll chase their immediate approval. The more you value a relationship's long-term health, the less you'll accommodate its short-term toxicity. When your romantic partner treats you dismissively, reactive caring says, let me prove my worth through more attention, more availability, more sacrifice. Strategic caring says, I care too much about both of us to enable this dynamic. My response will be what serves the relationship's highest potential, not what soothes the immediate tension. When your friend consistently takes advantage of your generosity, emotional suppression says, I don't care anymore. Emotional regulation says, I care too much to keep participating in something that diminishes us both. The key is internal versus external alignment. Internally, you feel the full spectrum of human emotion. Externally, you express only what serves the situation's highest good, maintaining genuine empathy while being strategically indifferent. True empathy means understanding what someone needs for their growth, not just what they want for their comfort. Sometimes these are opposite things. The empathetic parent doesn't rescue their teenager from natural consequences. They empathize with the pain of the lesson while allowing the lesson to teach. The empathetic friend doesn't enable destructive behavior. They empathize with the underlying pain while refusing to participate in its expression. Strategic indifference with genuine empathy looks like, I can see this is really hard for you, and I'm not going to fix it for you because that wouldn't actually help. I understand you're frustrated with my boundaries, and I'm maintaining them because I care about both of us. I empathize with your desire for immediate reassurance, and I'm going to respond in the way that serves your long-term confidence. Most people don't start with strategic indifference. They arrive at it through a predictable journey of pain, awakening, and integration. Understanding this journey helps you navigate it consciously rather than stumbling through it blindly. Stage 1. The desperate seeker, where most people live. This is the person who texts back immediately and expects the same. Says yes to everything to avoid disappointing others. Measures self-worth through external validation. believes that showing more care will create more connection, takes responsibility for other people's emotions, fears conflict, rejection, and abandonment more than loss of authenticity. The pain point: nothing they do seems to create the security, respect, or love they're desperately seeking. In fact, the harder they try, the more people seem to pull away or take them for granted. Self-assessment question: how often do I prioritize others' comfort over my own authenticity? Something breaks. A relationship ends despite all their accommodating. A job opportunity goes to someone less qualified but more confident. A friendship becomes completely one-sided. They realize that their strategy of caring more is actually creating the opposite of what they want. This stage often involves rage at the unfairness of people not appreciating their sacrifices, confusion about why nice people finish last, questioning everything they believed about relationships and success, discovering principles like strategic indifference, often through pain research. The danger: some people get stuck here in victimhood and resentment. Others swing to the opposite extreme and become manipulative or genuinely cold. The opportunity: this crisis can become the doorway to genuine power and authentic relationships. Stage 3. The learning phase, making expensive mistakes. This is where people start applying strategic indifference but lack the wisdom to do it skillfully. Common mistakes include being strategically indifferent to everyone, including people who've earned their investment, using withdrawal, punishment rather than boundary setting, becoming so focused on not appearing desperate that they appear disinterested in everything, overcorrecting from too available to completely unavailable. The learning: real strategic indifference isn't about treating everyone the same. It's about being selective about who earns your full investment. Stage 4. The integration, conscious competence. Here, people begin to understand that strategic indifference is a tool, not an identity. They learn to apply it situationally rather than universally. Maintain warmth and empathy while setting boundaries. Recognize when someone has earned their full investment versus when they need to maintain distance. Use it to create healthier dynamics rather than to punish or control. The milestone: they can be strategically indifferent without losing their humanity. Stage 5. The master, effortless power through compassionate indifference. At this level, strategic indifference becomes compassionate indifference. The person operates from such a secure sense of self-worth that they can give freely without creating unhealthy dynamics. They're indifferent to outcomes they can't control while being fully engaged with processes they can influence. The mastery: they care deeply about people's highest good, even when it means risking the relationship in its current form. The philosophy of true indifference, ancient wisdom for modern power. Strategic indifference isn't a new concept. It's an ancient principle that appears in every wisdom tradition, just under different names. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This is strategic indifference in its purest form, focusing your energy on what you can control while remaining unattached to outcomes you cannot. The Stoics understood that emotional reactions to external events are choices, not automatic responses. When someone treats you poorly, you can choose to react desperately, trying to control their behavior, or respond strategically, controlling only your own behavior. Stoic strategic indifference: I will act with integrity and kindness, and I am indifferent to whether others reciprocate, because their character is not under my control. The Buddhist perspective: non-attachment versus detachment. Buddhism teaches non-attachment, which people often confuse with detachment. Detachment is emotional numbing, cutting yourself off from caring. Non-attachment is caring fully while holding outcomes lightly. The Buddhist practitioner loves completely but doesn't cling to relationships remaining static. They invest fully in the present moment while remaining unattached to specific future outcomes. Buddhist strategic indifference: I love you completely, and I don't need you to love me back in order for my love to be complete. Eastern versus Western approaches. Eastern traditions emphasize the spiritual dimension, strategic indifference as a path to inner peace and enlightenment. The goal is transcending the ego's need for external validation. Western approaches tend to focus on practical outcomes, strategic indifference as a tool for success and influence. The goal is achieving desired results more effectively. The mastery comes from integrating both, using strategic indifference for practical effectiveness while simultaneously developing genuine inner peace and compassion. Here's what makes this script legendary rather than just tactical. The recognition that the highest form of strategic indifference isn't self-serving, it's service to the highest good of everyone involved. Compassionate indifference means caring so deeply about someone's growth and well-being that you're willing to risk their temporary displeasure to serve their long-term development. The parent who refuses to bail out their adult child's poor financial decisions isn't being cruel. They're caring too much about their child's development to enable their immaturity. The manager who doesn't rescue their employee from natural consequences isn't being heartless. They're caring too much about their employee's growth to prevent important learning experiences. The friend who won't participate in your victim story isn't being unsupportive. They're caring too much about your potential to enable your limitations. Examples of compassionate indifference in action. In leadership, the CEO who makes unpopular decisions because they serve the company's long-term health, even when it means temporary criticism from employees who want easier solutions. In parenting, the mother who doesn't argue with her teenager's emotional outbursts but instead responds with calm boundaries, caring more about her child's emotional regulation development than her child's immediate comfort. In friendship, the friend who stops providing endless emotional support for the same recurring drama, not because they don't care, but because they care too much to enable self-destructive patterns. In romance, the partner who doesn't chase or pursue when their significant other withdraws, not because they don't love them, but because they love them too much to participate in unhealthy relationship dynamics. This reframes everything. Instead of strategic indifference being about getting what you want from others, it becomes about serving what others need for their growth, even when they don't want it. Instead of being about power over others, it becomes about power with others. The power to create healthy dynamics that serve everyone's highest potential. Instead of being selfish strategy, it becomes selfless service. You risk your own comfort to avoid enabling others' dysfunction. The more genuinely indifferent you become to others' approval, the more approval flows toward you. The more you care about people's growth over their comfort, the more they ultimately trust and respect you. The more willing you are to risk relationships to serve their health, the healthier your relationships become. This isn't manipulation, it's the natural result of operating from genuine abundance rather than scarcity. When you don't need external validation, you can give authentic attention. When you don't fear losing relationships, you can create honest boundaries. When you don't require others' approval, you can serve their highest good. Rate yourself 1 to 10 on each statement. I check my phone immediately when I hear a notification. I say yes to requests even when I don't want to. I measure my self-worth through others' responses to me. I avoid conflict even when my boundaries are being crossed. I give advice when people haven't asked for it. I take responsibility for others' emotional states scoring. 42 to 60. Desperate seeker, high reactivity to external validation. 25 to 41. Learning phase, developing awareness but inconsistent application. 6 to 24. Integration phase, strategic in most situations with occasional slips. 0 to 5. Mastery level, naturally indifferent to outcomes beyond your control. 30-day integration challenge. Week 1. Digital boundaries. Implement 2-hour response delays to non-urgent messages. Practice reading messages without immediately responding. Notice your emotional reactions to delayed responses from others. Week 2. Conversational sovereignty. Use 5-second pauses before responding to emotionally charged statements. Practice saying, "That's interesting," instead of defending when criticized. Experiment with ending conversations while they're still engaging rather than dragging them out. Week 3. Selective investment. Choose one relationship where you'll reduce your initiation by 50%. Practice saying no to one request per day without over-explaining. Notice which people increase their effort when you decrease yours. Week 4. Compassionate indifference. Identify one situation where you can serve someone's growth by not rescuing them. Practice empathizing with someone's pain without trying to fix it. Choose long-term relationship health over short-term harmony in one interaction. Progress tracking questions. Daily. In what situation today did I choose my long-term integrity over immediate external approval? Weekly. Which relationships improved when I became less available, and which remained unchanged? Monthly. How has my internal sense of worth become less dependent on external validation? The person who masters compassionate indifference becomes a force of love disguised as indifference, a source of strength disguised as detachment, and a catalyst for others' growth disguised as withdrawal. They understand that the greatest gift you can give someone is not your endless availability, but your consistent authenticity. Not your immediate agreement, but your honest perspective. Not your desperate pursuit, but your selective investment. This is how strategic indifference evolves from a tactic for getting what you want into a philosophy for becoming who you're meant to be. And in becoming that person, you naturally attract everything you once desperately chased.